Instructions on X. That's the door. Run.
One more step. Where's the next door?
Next door is right down there. Or there's one that way too, yes?
Yes.
All right.
And
Put me in a different room.
Is the building that way? Or near the elevator?
Okay.
There are stairs.
If all else fails, you go on the balcony and jump.
Please don't.
Please do not, yeah.
Moved the snowbank today.
Oh,
Oh,
oh.
I take that back.
Yeah. Additions, deletions, or changes in the order of agenda items? All right, hearing none, we will move on to number 3, open to the public for items not related to the agenda. All right. Number 4, announcements and staff report. Any commissioner announcements?
Nope.
Nope. All right. Staff?
Nothing pressing. Lots of things going on, but nothing that you haven't. So.
Did you want to talk about the agreement that the city council ratified at the last meeting?
Oh, sure. Good point. You have probably noticed that there's been a vacant Pizza Hut for a while.
They get a lot?
As you may or may not know, there was a proposal for redevelopment of that that was submitted to the DRB in 2023. That was denied by the DRB because it did not include the what the DRB had calculated as the correct proportion of permanently affordable homes, and because they were including a drive-through ATM, whereas drive-through was not permitted. That was appealed to the environmental court. In the meantime, they submitted a new application to the DRB that resolved those 2 items and made some very minor site changes. That was approved by the DRB, but in the meantime, they were still in court. On the first one, the environmental court came to the same conclusion that the DRB had come to. That was appealed to the Supreme Court. This fall, subsequent to the passage of the updated land development regulations that you had submitted to council, council reviewed and they asked staff to look at it and communicate with the property owner. And ultimately, last week, the council approved a proposed stipulated judgment order to the court that would close out all legal matters by having the application physically match the 2024 DRB approval, and would adjust the number of permanently inclusionary units to what the 2024 city land development regulations require, which in that instance is a little bit lower. They were sort of in this place where, because they were seeking bonus units, they were having to do a lot more inclusionary. Last year in your set of updated regulations, you smoothed out the curve. So it's always 20%. So that was approved by the council unanimously last week. They, as part of that, wanted to just make a point of noting how much they appreciated all the hard work that the DRB had put into it, because the site design is all exactly as approved by the DRB. And ultimately, they made the choice, the council made the choice here that rather than to send the applicant back through the process just to change to the number of inclusionary that is now allowed, that it was expedient and in the community's interest to get this thing done. Part of that, they will have to meet the new standards also for EV ready parking. And they are agreed to and mandated to tear the existing buildings down by May 1st.
Ooh.
So those were a couple of the things that the council was really interested in making sure were happening. So,
Thanks. Is the drive-through in the approved? Okay, so
they did not include
it's just shuffled around how the units were priced basically from the original.
correct. So physically it will look exactly the same as the DRB approval. It's just the number of inclusionary units, it was adjusted slightly. It'll be 6 of 30 now.
Got it.
Yeah, to match the current regulations.
Is it a single structure or are there 2 structures?
3 structures.
3 structures.
So a bank structure at the corner where the gas station used to be.
Yep.
A mixed use building that will have some kind of commercial on the first floor and 2 or 3 apartments above it, sort of where the front of the Pizza Hut area was.
Yep.
And then behind that, a 3-story residential building with 27 or 28 homes in it and underground parking, and that'll take up where the Pizza Hut building was and where the Bourne service, not the
Yeah,
gas
the building
station, but
behind,
it was
yeah,
a,
okay, yeah.
it was like a repair
Yeah.
shop behind.
Great. Well,
Yeah.
it's great to see some progress on that corner because it is.
My only comment
Not
as a
as
city councilor is part of the moral of the story is that when you hear developers complain about the cost of doing business in South Burlington, a lot of it is self-inflicted.
In this case.
That's all I'm gonna say.
Okay.
Just two quick updates. The Equity and Planning Outreach Toolkit has been finalized, and by finalized, I mean it's a living document, so we'll continue to be updated as we learn things over time, but that's something that we are ready to roll out to the Planning Commission, the City Council, to committees, to departments. Over the next month or so, we'll be coming back to you and making presentations about that, finalized, for now, document, and moving forward with really utilizing it in our public outreach processes across the city. And then the other thing is related-ish, the Parks and Open Space Master Plans process has kicked off. There's an advisory group of representatives from different committees and different staff departments who are working with the consultant to get that project going. It's entering a public outreach phase, and that's the meeting that was in this room immediately before this meeting. So I'm the planning department's representative on that advisory group, so I'll be able to update you as more things move forward with that.
Great.
And that's it.
All right. So on to number 5, form-based code draft language review and discussion. Kelsey, if you want to set the table, we'll.
Yeah, so a while ago now, at this point, the City Council and the Planning Commission both identified a need to re-examine the form-based code and how construction is being regulated in this area in the downtown. In your packet, you have a memo that outlines the changes at a topic level, not sort of the details of those changes, because some of that is in the document that I didn't manage to get out to you until today, even though it was available in the packet. And some of it remains to be worked out in the language. Generally speaking, everything of note is outlined in that memo. So that's something that I would like to talk through today about. Are we going in the right direction? Are we taking the right approach? Are the change that you're seeing meeting the goals of re-examining the form-based code in the first place? And that is all outlined in the table that is also in your packet. There's a table of motivations across the top. So the motivations, there's 5 columns that are the why are we doing this? Why are we re-looking at the form-based code? And then down the rows are all of the at the topic level, not sort of every little change, but at the topic level, what changes are we proposing to make to the form-based code area? As a quick reminder, you've seen Nick Atherton in here a few times talking about the process for this. The city is engaged with architects, with developers, landowners in the form-based code area, got their feedback on the permitting process, how it's been to work with the city, where are the pinch points or pain points in the regulations. What is it that's causing issues in how buildings are designed? And something that we really have landed on is that the way that the regulations were written, all with good intentions, but create a very small box for people to actually build buildings, which is partially why buildings end up looking very similar. I did want to note that we do now have a few other buildings that have been or are being built in this form-based code area that do look different. And so part of the looking different is just having a different design team and a different developer who has different financial constraints and different other things. These buildings to our east are all developed by the same group of people. But then 1068 Williston Road, so the top of Dorset Street, North Dorset Street, that building was built by somebody else. And the Doubletree building across that's being built up to the road is being designed by a different group.
And
Quarry Hill Road. So some variation will come with the different design groups and different property owners. But the intention in this is to meet motivations for why we wanted to re-examine the form-based code and see if the changes that we're proposing to make, in your opinion, are meeting them. So those are the two big questions, is the proposed changes in the memo, are we going in the right direction? Does it feel like that's what we need to be doing? Are there questions about anything? Is there anything specific in the language that is at a topic level you'd like to discuss today? I acknowledge that I made a mistake and did not send out the actual draft language at the end of last week like I intended. Planning commissioners received that earlier today, but there's no expectation that you have read that language at this point. But I'm happy to walk through any of that if there are topics in the memo that you wanted to have any further discussion on. So that's kind of the meat of the changes, and then the sort of meta discussion is the changes that we've outlined. Are we meeting the motivations? Are we doing what we intended to do? Is there anything missing? Are we, missing something important in one of the reasons that we're doing this examination? And what do you want to see added to this?
I'll start us off real quick. I did have a question on the master plan, which I know previously was not allowed in form-based code, now is allowed in form-based code. Obviously, the U-Mall would be the biggest,
Yes.
I don't know if proponent or,
User of
property that would, how many other properties do we have right now that would benefit or would use that? Or is it really just for the mall?
I mean, it depends how you count it, because we have a couple of areas that currently are small lots or are a bunch of property owners that have the potential of being redeveloped together.
Mhm.
That all is sort of private contracting and other things, but the north side of Williston Road, and there's a planned road behind Williston Road, like that whole area, there's some potential for consolidation of lots and being in master planning in that area. There are a couple of larger lots in that area as well. San Remo Drive has a couple of larger lots, and again, the potential to consolidate some lots.
Mhm.
Those are the big places. So the U-Mall, the north side of Williston Road, and San Remo Drive. That's what I would say.
Conceivably, I mean, we've heard no rumblings of this, but conceivably, the Price Chopper Plaza property, is, it's fully occupied at this point,
Mhm.
but it is of the scale and size. I think a question for you all to work through would be, what's the goal with the master plan? If you were to choose to do it, I think we've identified the challenge being that the form-based code currently is set up to be very site by site. So you develop an entire site plan for your property. What these folks did was, instead of a master plan, is they subdivided up the property into various blocks. But then there's components of what they did that are almost a master plan. So they got one wetlands permit for the whole thing.
Mhm.
And then they allocated some of their civic space to the goose pond that they all applied to. And, there's other components like traffic and things like that, that this site happened to have taken care of because it went through all that federal permitting to do Market Street years before. But absent that, there wasn't really a tool that would let them
Mhm.
look at the thing in its entirety. And so when we think about a property, certainly the U-Mall, but maybe others who might be thinking about phases of doing things, wanting to create some lots and having some predictability so that they could start to market it to different folks, thinking about stormwater as one thing, even if they're going to do a project over 10 or 20
Mhm.
years, so that they can have certain knowns, like I said, stormwater, transportation, maybe where they're going to lay out a park, and then get credit for it in the future.
Yeah.
We think that there's some advantages, and
So the way it's currently written in the draft is a fairly low threshold of the land needed, so 2 acres, which is how it applies in the rest of the city, but making it elective. So nobody would have to do it. But that's a point that could be, that's everything that can be discussed. So the idea is that if you make it low, people could do what Paul's saying and get the benefits of master plan if they choose to. But then part of the reason why you would choose to is that the same as anywhere else in the city, you're vested in your what you
Correct,
applied
yeah.
for in the master plan. So for, especially for larger properties, and in this area, 2 acres is a pretty large property. A lot of things like financing are tied to some of the certainty and, you know, future plans and the ability to build in certain ways. And so the order of operations with building is sometimes that you have to sort of sketch out something and then get your financing and then solidify your plans, which is really the master plan, financing, and then subdivision or site plan process anyway. So it's allowing a little more certainty for larger property owners to be able to do that kind of planning and get that kind of secured financing.
Done.
Yeah, I mean, I looked over and there's certainly some really good stuff in here. And I was looking at the addition of the pedestrian street thing. And I don't know, maybe I missed something, but I think that since we have different landowners involved, why don't we just put the pedestrian street on the master plan and say, this is where it goes? Because if we don't do that, I don't think it's ever gonna happen.
In this case, do you mean the official map?
No, I mean, the center city master plan, you know, because I mean, I always kind of envisioned, well.
You mean our document?
Yeah, basically.
Yes, okay.
Basically, everything that's been built so far, you know, leaves certain opportunities, basically from the new bridge at the Healthy Living. From that intersection, right through the triangular shaped property, you know, right to the front of this building, and potentially out Mary Street. You know, that could become entirely pedestrian. And it would provide what South Burlington is totally lacking, and that is, you know, a street that can be used for deliveries, but basically is pedestrian only. And if we don't create that now, I don't think it's gonna happen.
So there's 2 different sides of what I think you're talking about. One is sort of public investment in a selected portion of public right of way to be like a Church Street-like place, a pedestrian boulevard kind of
It
area.
could be something that would have been a street,
Yeah.
but we're gonna say, no, we don't
Right.
want a street there, we want this.
Yep.
And yeah, it's kind of the same
Yep.
thing.
So the intention with this, so the pedestrian street is, we had feedback from developers and from owners, and especially of some of the larger lots, is when you require all of your buildings to front on a street, you end up with a dead middle of blocks often, and often that is only really usable for parking, maybe park space, usually not because they want to use it. So allowing property owners to run a pedestrian street that doesn't require the same investment in infrastructure as a full right of way, but is a walkable, well-designed space that you could front a building onto.
Right.
That can help fill in some of these larger lots. The intention is so it's 2 different things. That is a smaller scale. That's
Right,
sort
that's
of
a
across.
smaller scale than what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so that's kind of across a lot. Like I used to work in Concord, New Hampshire. There's a street like that kind of at each end is sort of a 1.5 to 2 cars wide. And then it opens into more of a plaza and then closes in again on the other end. So it's more of those like extended civic space kind of spaces at the scale of a lot. What you're discussing is taking that sort of look and feel and extending it on a much longer public piece of right of way,
Right.
which is sort of it's the big version. That's a
Yeah.
much bigger
It's
city
become
discussion.
more usable at the city scale.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely merit in discussing that. It's a little bit of a different thing than a developer choosing a pedestrian street as their street type.
Oh, it's
That-
definitely different,
Yeah.
because you're kind of saying, this is where it's gonna be, and, you know, it's just kind of like putting something on the city map.
Yep.
You know, it's like, it's gonna be here, this is what we want.
Yep.
And we can take advantage of it and make a better building and make a better street and actually potentially make a better city by having it. Because I don't think when you have so many individual lots that'll happen unless you designate it and say, this is what we wanna have now. And there's not much left. I mean, there's not a whole lot of opportunity left to do that now. And if we don't do it now, it's not gonna happen. And we'll lose that opportunity to really create a pedestrian, because, I think most people's idea of what a pedestrianized city is is not just street front, sidewalks. But rather, your ability to, create passageways to take a shortcut, and certainly a shortcut between here and, the healthy living, that area, would be appropriate, because it's like right now you can't walk that way. And maybe someday there will be a regular street there, but I think it would be so much more pleasant if it was a, pedestrian way.
So I think, so we are intending to, at the next meeting, talk more about the street hierarchy map that we've been working on, and you've seen from Nick and Paul before at previous meetings. I think that's something that can be raised again at that meeting, to say, like, maybe this is designated on the map as being a secondary or tertiary street, maybe that should be a pedestrianized street or something like that. That's what I think you're talking about. We're allowing
Mary Street, it's just like, cause
Sure.
I think there's a lot of people that don't want to see that become a major throughway.
Yeah, understood.
And,
In this,
and making it into a pedestrian way, but allow deliveries and things like that. It could kind of keep the scale at, at a little friendlier level.
Sure. Yep, I think that's part of the sort of street network conversation. What's in the Article 11 that you have now, in that addition of the streets, is clarifying what that a developer could have a cross lot connection that is a pedestrian street that they can then have further buildings on the interior
Right.
that front onto.
Right.
So it's an option for a developer versus having an official map conversation about should there be a pedestrianized street versus a small piece on a single
And
lot.
I like the idea that the curves were taken out for
Yeah.
that too. That was something that a lot of us really would have liked to have seen on Market Street. Might have been a whole lot less fast traffic if we'd have designed it a little differently.
We tried curbless, we fought very hard for it,
We did.
yeah.
Just clarify, these pedestrians you're talking about, I apologize if I just missed it in the document. Is there a requirement that they need to go through, or can they essentially, or are like pedestrian cul-de-sacs per se allowed under this?
The way it's written is that you do have to connect on two ends of
Okay.
the street.
Yeah.
You can have a courtyard as like a
Like a U
civic
kinda?
space. Like,
Yeah.
so it's
That's
a,
what
you
I'm
know,
coming to.
yeah, so there's a sort of an opportunity to have a civic space, meet your civic space requirements with a large sort of plaza courtyard kind of setup. And you can, now I'm getting all turned around, you can front on civic spaces. Yes.
It can count for some of your frontage, can it not?
Yeah,
That's what
that's
the
what it
draft
says.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
I-
that's something that's possible. It wouldn't be considered a street at that point.
But, yeah,
But to your specific question about does it need to be a connected street or not, I think that up until this point, under the form-based code, all planned streets have to connect at both ends.
Yeah.
Whether you want to create a different rule for a pedestrian street, given that sometimes they're sort of the back corner of a lot that is otherwise very hard to develop, and then there's a big wetland complex behind it. Like the east end of Market Street.
yeah,
I think you've got some room to have that conversation about whether in certain instances, a pedestrian one could be just the end of an area, or if it is required to connect, maybe the form of the connection could become a 10-foot rec path that goes.
Sure,
somewhere
sure.
else. So I think that's something that is a little bit malleable,
yeah.
that doesn't undo the rest of the code if you want to think about a little more flexibility for that tool.
Yeah, I guess it's, yeah, part of why I start thinking about that is that my understanding is these spaces, these are still privately owned, correct? These pedestrian plazas and courtyards we're talking about. Like, this isn't city land per se. This isn't like a public right of way. This is, there is still part of their property.
At the time of application, it is part of their property. We've not yet gotten to the question of whether it could be publicly owned in the future.
Yeah, I guess this, there's this, I guess, a part of, I guess I've seen too many instances where you have like these privately owned public spaces where it's like, oh, you can't be here past midnight, or if you sit on a bench for more than 30 minutes, someone's gonna call the police and tell you to leave or something. Like, I guess if the whole point is this is still like a public nice sort of space for people, I guess just want to make sure that there's it actually is public, not just like a fancy front lawn that you could be asked to leave if the people don't like the look of you in the building or something, I guess.
Yeah, we haven't fully had that.
Yeah, okay,
conversation.
maybe
My-
I'm ahead of
my-
myself a little.
My recommendation would be that something that is a right of way that a building is designed to front on should be public.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, and again, that's why I'm hard thinking about going through, because also I think that helps the feel of it too, that it doesn't
Yeah.
feel like you're in something, you're intruding, this is a proof of, okay, yeah, I was just curious how I think about that.
Michael?
About courtyards and plazas, I had in the draft, are we permitting or accommodating that as also as civic space or open space?
Yes,
So that's one question. And the other one is on building heights. I know we talked about a building that is behind. There's a building on a principal street and then there's another building behind it. We talked about allowing more height on the building that's behind.
Mhm.
Is that accommodated in the draft in any way?
so there's a couple of instances where that is anticipated. One is where a T4, a Transect 4 is bordering on a lower scale area, like, the Brookwood neighborhood over here, like if the Hannaford was redeveloped, the transition from the U-Mall property to the neighborhood behind would have to be at sort of a step down, back towards the neighborhood. The other is at the east end of Market Street here. We're talking about the north side of Market Street, having the front side have a certain height, have the whole thing be T4, the front be a certain height, and then move it higher as you go backwards.
I think in adding to the T5 and the T4 is a terrific idea. Something that is not important, but for somebody else who might read it, you've got here increasing height limitations. I think you mean decreasing limitations.
Increasing the top limit of height.
So decreasing limitations, increasing the limit.
Oh,
Good old English
right.
language.
Okay.
Yes,
I had to.
Allowing
read
for
it.
taller buildings.
reducing.
I knew
the
what you meant
restriction.
in the end, but I had to read it.
The double negative of reducing the restriction, yes.
Yeah. Okay, that was my only two questions at this point.
I did have a couple questions on kind of the
Yeah.
more minutia of some of the height changes, and I'm understanding correctly that when I'm reading that all the yellow text is the changes.
No, so there are more changes than are what are in yellow. The yellow or most of the changes that are not yellow are the ones that are changed for clarification and for clarity purposes. There were some ranges of
Okay.
feet and things like that that we've clarified. The yellow were the outstanding questions. So like the height is the heights
Yeah.
are highlighted because the commission hasn't fully discussed or
Gotcha,
decided on
gotcha.
what the maximum.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess so again, okay, so I think I understood, so I mean. A couple of questions I noticed, for example, that the proposal was for T5 to have a maximum of 12. I remember that when we talked about this a month or two ago, 14 was thrown out. Is there a reason that that's been modified?
No, so that's just it's still an open discussion at this point.
Okay.
It's something that will be, it's a bigger item in the sort of universe
Yeah.
of the form-based code. The idea is that is something that needs to be discussed again. It's not something that is in this packet for this evening. 10, 12, 14, I think those are all in the wheelhouse. It's something, it also depends a little bit, and there were discussions previously, my understanding, I wasn't at these meetings, that there are certain areas where higher height might be allowable and other areas where it wouldn't, and those may not map directly onto the transects. So you might have some areas of the T5 that are a little lower than other areas of the T5, or some areas of the T4 that are actually higher. Depending on sort of the context of what's around them. Like hypothetically, closer to the interstate, you don't care about it being higher because it's farther away from pedestrian areas. But that's all a further discussion to be had. My understanding is something that was pretty well agreed upon is the raising of the minimum to a minimum of 3 stories in the T5. Not
Well,
a full
and
discussion of
also-
the maximum.
Well, but also that there was a lot of support for an increase in the maximums with
Yep.
us to come back with some recommendations. So we were
Those specific
prioritizing getting
locations.
this first component to you, and in the next couple of meetings, you're gonna start to see our specific recommendations on heights.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, the area north of Williston Road. You know, it goes quite far back. The further back you go, the higher we should consider allowing the number of stories or the total height.
And the land begins to go
Yeah.
downwards a little bit. It's not dramatic, but probably by the time you're behind Chicken Charlie's, you've gained an additional story. As the land slopes down there, so just that's another consideration in there.
Otherwise, I think.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I guess, so what exactly are we kind of trying to decide upon, agree on exactly today? Like,
Yeah, so when this project came to us, there was, concern about certain things that are these, like those 5 motivations, like these are the reasons why we wanted to look at the form-based
Mhm.
code again. Partially, this meeting is to make sure that you all think that those motivations are being satisfied by the proposed changes. If there's any big gaps, is there any, you're really not, satisfying a certain one of the motivations or another one. And the other is that generally speaking, our approach to the form-based code has been to, I've thought of it as all the overlapping regulations has created a very small box for what a building can look like and how it can be built. The intention, instead of saying, oh, you have to do this and being very prescriptive about you must have a clock tower or you must have a round window or whatever, is instead of giving people more things that they must do, we're doing, it's not the opposite, but we're doing something slightly different where we're really honing in on of the things that are important, clarifying the language and opening the box. So you have a bigger box in which an architect can work, the more chance they're going to come up with something interesting and something different than the building next to it. As opposed to sort of the opposite approach of hyper regulating and getting really down into the details and the minutia and making our form-based code twice as long, instead of really making sure we're hitting on variation in facades, entrances, pedestrian scale, all these things, and then anticipating that those things are the important things that then open up the box in which a developer and an architect can
Yeah,
work.
corner windows are a terrific idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll give an architect so much scope.
Yep.
From what I've seen in other places.
Yeah, well,
And I think that's a really good small example, Michael, of, Paul, I recall a couple of meetings ago, you were, I think the word you used was shocked to hear that the box felt so tight to them. And I think that's a perfect example of where the code unintentionally sort of said you can't put a window at a corner. So therefore that sort of designs a style, a type of architecture that says, well, any creativity is out the door because you can't put a window within 30 feet, 30 inches of a corner. It's opening the box for little things like that create a lot more opportunity.
and things like allowing civic space to be counted as frontage means that you can have some more variation in the facade and get some benefit to those front-facing courtyards. Changes in how the building breaks were regulated, accepting or exempting small buildings from building breaks, so incentivizing actually smaller buildings, in addition to the breaking up of the facades of larger buildings. So really, we've really tried to focus on exactly what the city is trying to accomplish and what are the things that really make a difference, and trying to shed out the things that either kind of double regulated or overlapping regulated in a way that really narrowed the box in a way that was not intended.
There's a couple of specific things that I wanted to highlight when we talk about variety in buildings that this draft includes. One is the regulation currently requires 3 building breaks every 80 feet. That is a style, as Kelsey noted. This exempts buildings less than 60 feet in width from having to do that. It also, though, to a nod of some of the conversations that you've had, if buildings are built with a high quality form of brick, they can be 100 feet wide and just be brick, rather than having to sort of make changes, sort of in an acknowledgement of some of the conversations that you've said of like, brick is high quality, period. You don't have to also then sort of mix it up. Similarly, one of the things that we heard from the designers and from you was that some of the areas where variety really shows up for folks, but that you don't get credit for is variety in the sort of ratios of windows. You know, whether you choose to have some, you know, a mix. In some of the examples, Paul, that you had pointed out, the buildings look very similar, but how they chose to do the windows are pretty different. So giving some credit to that and balconies as a way that you can show variety that isn't just, you know, building comes in and out by 2 feet. Or up and down by 2 feet.
Giving credit for grand entrances and lobbies, you know, instead of then you also have a door again and another 20 feet, it's.
And then pairing that, you know, speaking of that, making sure that all buildings have a front door that is facing onto the courtyard or street. So there's a couple of, that was not required in the current code, and there were 1 or 2 buildings built where there's not a principal entrance to the building on the street.
That was one question I had, and I know that you obviously heard this from some of the developers, was the requirement that all the doors be open?
That's
What-
something that we're still working through. A little
Yeah,
bit,
because
but-
that was a major, I know as a retail business, if I've got a space with 3 front doors, I don't want 3 front doors open.
Right,
Yeah, so that's a prohibitor of what we're trying to get, which is retail on the first floor. So how do you handle that?
yeah, so 2 things that we did, one thing that we did and one thing that we're still going to do is change the door spacing, so it's not, they're not quite as frequently required as they were before. We have heard from some developers that they actually have been, what did you say, someone was installing a door where there hadn't been one in the building next door. Because some of their tenants were actually smaller than had been required by the door spacing. But we're also talking about the difference between a public entrance and an operable entrance. And working that into potentially allowing kind of every other being open to the public, and then the others have to still be a door and have to still actually open, but can be locked. So if you happen to have, you know, you're a larger building and you happen to have a larger ground floor tenant, you could have that where there's a door and then there's a locked door. But then in the future, if that tenant goes out, there's already 2 doors there if you rearrange the inside.
So,
Okay.
Just to elaborate, or go ahead, Michael, I want to elaborate on the sort of the thinking behind that a little bit more
Yeah.
and
I'd
another.
like to come back to
paragraph.
the question of balconies, because
Well, actually, hold on, I'm sorry. Did you, Ryan has had his hand up for a while. Did you have your hand up?
Brian's not a member of the commission.
No, well, I was just being polite, Ryan. You want-
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Right.
Things. I just wanted to ask for clarification about bricks being always a better material, because we see that like a lot of buildings are brick and look terrible. It's like really like, do they do like the fancy brick work? Do they use the textured?
So
versus
this
the
is
not
something that
textured?
we're working on, is we have currently in the memo a placeholder with some brackets that says high quality. Understood, and that high quality is a very difficult term. And it's honestly, anything in the draft, in any memo that I send or a draft that's in a bracket or has question marks is because we're still working on it. So defining high quality is something that we're still working toward and trying to figure out exactly how to do that. Because you're right, someone who, you know, the basic level of brick and just goes, here's a basic level of brick, that's not what we're talking about. So
Is that the memo you sent today?
no, that was the one that was in the packet.
Well, but the memo that has today has the draft in it.
It used
Nothing
translucent.
has the draft.
It's not in the draft, it's in both. Let me double check. Anyway.
The word first. Michael, go ahead.
Balconies.
Yeah.
Going back probably 2 years by now, we had a lot of discussion about the need for residential apartments to have access to the outside. And we hit on balconies as being one of the ways that we could achieve that. So shouldn't we make balconies for apartments which are on the outside of a building a requirement, or give extra points for it? We're not using the point system, but give some incentive. I know the incentive is that it counts.
Yeah.
But is
So-
that enough?
So all of those numbers are movable. So currently I have it written as 50% of the balcony is allowed to count, with the intention that then you would still have to have a common space somewhere else in the building and not just private balconies for everywhere. again, it's going back to our sort of opening the box approach, is giving people credit for things that they weren't going to get any credit for before. Allows more flexibility in designs, because I'm thinking that, you know, hypothetically, you have a building that has 30% of the units have a balcony, but then another 50% of the units have direct access onto a back of the building rooftop courtyard or something. Like, there are other options that people can weigh. And not saying every unit has to have a front-facing balcony.
No,
I
if
think
there's a
allows.
walkout, for example, you don't need a balcony.
Right, if you're on the ground floor and you're a walkout, if you're on an upper floor, but you're directly adjacent to the rooftop garden, or you're there's a shared balcony space that's because of a step back, it's built into that step back. There's other flexible options that you still get credit for in your site amenities, but it doesn't paint all the buildings into the same box of everybody has to have a balcony.
So currently it's 50%.
Well, so there's two, right, you mentioned incentives, there's two things that balconies can give you credit for in this draft. One is that you get credit, you can count it towards your site amenity. The other is that in this draft, it also counts as a way in which you get building breaks.
Yes.
So from your architectural design, so that's sort of giving you a double benefit of doing that in terms of incentives. It makes somebody that's intentional to really encourage somebody to want to do it.
Balconies are very good at building
Visual.
breaks.
Right.
Actually, hold on, Paul, his hand up.
I just wanted to reply to Paul. The original form-based code was written for a very different outcome than what we have. And I have never seen form-based code as something that's restrictive. I've always seen it as something liberating, actually. And part of form-based code is you can make any changes you want to at any time you want to. So, I mean, we're building now a modern city. So, I mean, I'm fine with, you know, what we're doing. I mean, this is completely appropriate to modify the form-based code so that it deals with the reality that we're dealing with now, you know, which is, you know, the Market Street area that we have, the U Mall, the north side of Wellston Road. You know, that's all stuff that we should be taking on, you know. So, I mean, we're gonna have to leave the 19th century village to Burlington and, you know, build a 21st century city here, you know. So that's whatever we need to do that is what we should do. So you have my support for it.
Colin?
Yeah, I had one question. I don't know if this is too nitpicky on the or is it out in the T4 standards about ground story residential privacy. They're talking about having a 33, it says a 36-inch like minimum sill height for privacy reasons. I guess when I see that, I definitely understand the desire behind having a residential privacy. I guess my concern with that particular number, or maybe I need to understand the number a little better, is if we're thinking of privacy and like, oh, I don't want people looking in my window, I feel like I'd want that number to be like, I don't know, 6 feet or higher or something, you know what I mean? Which is essentially requires you to have your first floor be a mezzanine level, which in my building, that is what it is. And I mean, that works fine, but that does, you know, change the nature of the building to be sure. So I guess I am on the other hand, though, perhaps some people actually might want to have like, you know, a big bay, like sliding glass door that opens onto a park. And when they want privacy, they just draw the blinds or something, or, you know, have like a sheer curtain or something like that. So I guess I'm wondering is if our goal is to have privacy, should it be higher than that? But the goal, because I guess I'm just sort of like 36 inches kind of feels like the stretch, where it stops you from having like, if I understand this correctly, from having like a window like this or like a ground to floor window open up park, you just curtain when you don't want the privacy. But the 3 foot wouldn't allow for kind of true privacy, I guess is. So I guess I'm wondering if I guess I just would want to more to think about what the rationale looking at exact number versus not a no number or a higher number.
Yeah, so that is in the current
Okay, that's in the current
that's
one.
in the current form-based code. That's not something
Gotcha.
changed. It is yellow because I have the same question.
Yeah,
is that a good number? Is that an effective regulation to have? I don't know the history of it as well as Paul does.
Yeah, we can look back to that one.
Yeah.
That was not in the original form-based code. It was an addition in, I want to say like 2018 or 2019.
it feels decent restricted, like that is a pretty,
Right.
no, that does make
I
some
don't think we-
big changes on how you build your building, kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
No, no.
So I can look back to see that.
Yeah,
what that
there were three
discussion
different
was.
packets
Yeah.
that went.
I guess, yeah, my guns are, if we're re-examining that, my thought would be either 0 or 6, my temptation is more towards just eliminate it. And if the developer wants to create more, because I think I think there's pros and cons to having a truly ground floor level apartment versus a properly elevated one, like that's full 6 feet up, so.
Do you think that there's a different, like, right now it's written as either facing a public park or a street? Do you think there's a difference in those two things? Like, I
That's a good
don't,
point,
I
that's a
don't
good
think
point.
you'd want a residential building
page is
with
that?
ground floor. It's in the,
It's in the
PDF
back, it's not
table.
in the packet. Yeah.
But
That is on the packet. Colin, did you get that one from the city website?
Yes,
Yeah,
am I reading
the-
the wrong thing?
That, the document you're looking at is not in the other
I'm
package.
gonna fight with the agenda center.
Okay,
That the
Which document
document
is
that
it?
they got last week that I PDF'd from the agenda center is not the same
Yeah,
as what you would have pulled on off.
and what you
later.
sent me is not what he has. That's what I was looking at when I was talking to you on the phone today, not
So-
what you.
Gremlins of working out a
The
new.
the Excel sheets that I sent to you all at the end of last
Is,
week.
is
what
that,
he's
okay,
talking
okay,
about. Yeah.
my apologies.
You can mix- Yeah,
All right, all
I
right.
got those.
yeah.
I mean, I downloaded them.
but that's, but yeah, I think you're right that the whole. I may know a way of doing it, because like I said, I'm trying to think like, oh, like on a street, you might want to be like
Higher.
6 feet or more, but then the flip side, it means that if you had a building that was street one side, back of the union, like I'm thinking townhouse at this point, I'm just
Yeah.
wanting to make sure that if you put say a 6 foot requirement.
You couldn't have an interior hallway that made a lot of sense.
Yeah, and then also in the back couldn't open onto the park properly, you would sort of, unless you had a lot of super elevation, which gets very expensive very quickly.
Yeah,
But I mean, I could maybe see an argument for. I'm just spitballing here, but maybe saying just having a 36-inch. Just for a street and not for a park. I mean, versus, but that's, I guess the other question would be, would a developer actually build a like 0 height? You know what I mean? Like, I guess I'm,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, you don't know what a developer's gonna do.
Yeah.
It's kind of the problem, and, I can see a situation, like, I don't think if you got it to like be a 6 feet thing, that you'd end up having someone building off the back, but there are definitely like sort of half basements and things like that that end up with
Before.
like a deck off the back, like not
Sure, that's
ground
true.
floor, but that's again more infrastructure than a patio or
yeah,
something.
I guess it's something sort of like we understand what exact kind of building we're trying to hit.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what you saying.
Donna, go ahead. Sorry.
Think about this part of the conversation. Because I think, again, you're trying to be very specific, where you should just make sure that your intent is clear. And you don't have to tell them how to do it, just that, if there's a ground floor unit, that you have to deal with privacy issues. That could be a wall. I mean, I was in places where they created houses out of, army barracks and stuff like that. And you could see what people did. They had a very nice little garden outside their unit, and it was very public, and it was very nice. And they had sliding glass doors, they had everything, It's like, I don't think you have to be so specific. You just have to say the intent is that if you're gonna have ground floor units, that you have a suitable privacy, a suitable solution for privacy. And not try to tell them how to do it every time, because that's very restrictive.
So the problem is this is form-based code, this is administrative. So you do actually have to be quite specific because it can't leave discretion to the administrative officer. This doesn't go to the DRB, so saying you have to appropriately deal with privacy is not specific enough. You would either have to say 36 inches, or you would have to say, you have to meet.
Or a privacy wall, or.
It does
Right.
allow for that. It says landscaping or hardscaping can be used to achieve that 36. So yeah, a 36-inch high hedge wouldn't work.
So it's,
But it has 36
you
inches.
either have to write fairly elaborate standards that say like, really, here's a written flow chart, if this, then this, if that, then this. Or you say something like 36, and that's just the end of the question, because we're in this administrative area.
Right.
Unless you wanted to, I mean, the only other way is for someone to have to then go to get a variance and the whole thing, and that just adds to the process. You might as well not have a form-based code at that point.
Right, I mean, you could theoretically have, I don't know if it would work in this case, but you could have an outcome-based one. You could say that, you know, shall be screened such that blank, blank, blank.
Sure, shall be screened such that a 6-foot tall eye line can't look into your bathroom.
Right.
But, you know, at that point, then what do you write?
Let me,
It can also
let me ask,
be-
hold on,
it can
Donna,
also be
hold on,
technically-
hold on. Is that the level of detail you want from us tonight, or do we need to be more high level?
I
That seems like we're getting into the minutia here
Right,
when,
no, I appreciate highlighting
Yeah.
the question,
Yeah.
and we were gonna look into, that's what this meeting is really. like,
okay, all
Highlight
right,
the question, what are your questions, what are your concerns, what can we go back and get more
Okay,
information
all right.
or clarify?
I just wanted to make sure that we
I
weren't
appreciate
going down a rabbit hole we didn't need to go to. I'm sorry, go ahead, Donna.
No, this is separate, but also I wondered, since form-based code isn't really set up to deal with things like stormwater runoff. But there are things about building designs that very much affect stormwater runoff. And, we sort of noted that we don't see rooftop gardens anywhere. We haven't seen around here an awful lot yet anyway of green roofs. And everybody's like, oh, it's so expensive and everything. Yes, but so is stormwater. Stormwater is incredibly expensive. So are we giving builders any credit for doing green roofs in terms of their stormwater? Because the denser you build, the more stormwater problems you're gonna generate, and that's why cities like Chicago started doing this quite a long time ago. And they're experts at it now.
So
And they retrofit buildings for stormwater too, when they're older buildings.
So I guess I'd give sort of a yes and a no answer to your question, Donna. The way that the city set up its stormwater standards when we rewrote them a few years ago was very intentionally outcome-based, not input-based. And so your obligation is to make sure that Jessica's gonna shoot me for getting all the wrong words here, but that your what is leaving your property is appropriate. How you get there, the city, the regulations said, be as creative as you want to be, essentially. We're interested not in having you design it in a specific way, but having the outcomes be meeting our standards of,
Zero
laws of
outcome.
X and,
Mhm.
right, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So in that way, it is, if not incentivizing, then at least allowing. There are some other points in the city's regulations that might be challenging for that. So, the city also has a rule that says that by ordinance, that buildings need to be heated and cooled by electrical renewable energy. Oftentimes, that means rooftop units today.
Right, and they
Yeah,
do
those are
combine,
rooftops.
I mean, they exist side by side, most
Right.
of those existing.
But it is
buildings.
complex, so I'm just sort of noting that what we're seeing today is a lot of rooftop mini split type.
Right, but that doesn't mean you can't have, because, these are buildings, older buildings are retrofitted, with green roofs and stuff. It just seems like we haven't seen much of it around here, and I don't think any of the municipalities and cities are doing much to, show that this is a valid way. I mean, it's certainly less expensive than what they did in the parking lots out here, having to put all that infrastructure below to keep all the stormwater. But not that they had any other choice in the matter. I'm not saying they had a choice there, but that's a very expensive system, and they are doing that, and yet they're not doing green roofs, even though it slows down the stormwater considerably. So just.
Hold on, Jessica.
Yeah, I guess, Paul, that was a great description, way better than what you find in the stormwater manual. And Donna, I think it's a really good point. There's very few of them. There's like one at UVM and there's one at the airport. But I think what we just want to make sure we're doing is not doing something that would prohibit somebody who wanted to do a green roof from having it be like an allowed option. Because I think they're great. And, especially if, like the one at the airport, you can kind of walk around and have some actual like nice green space where someone could go and, sit there and, kind of be up high and have, you know, the plants of the green roof around them, which is really quite nice.
I think the one at the hospital is also, it's right outside one of the cafeteria areas, so you can look out on it instead of looking out on a plastic, on a rubber roof.
Rubber. Go ahead, Cole. I'm sorry. We've called his hand up there. Grab you, Michael. Go ahead.
One quick basic, with green roofs, is a green roof currently, the area of green roof, is that considered pervious surface for the purposes of like your impervious surface coverage for something?
No, I don't think so.
Should it be then? Like,
It definitely should.
yeah, I mean, it seems like that would be a way to definitely set, or add an incentive to them, because yeah, if your whole building is fully green, then count that as a pervious surface maybe.
Yep.
Its whole point is to reduce stormwater runoff.
So that's something that's certainly worth following up. That would be within the stormwater ordinance.
Okay,
Because commercial properties get charged a stormwater rate based on their impervious surface.
so that's a different committee in charge of that ordinance?
That's ordinances are council's purview.
Okay.
And staff, so we can certainly share this to staff as an idea.
Yeah,
In terms of the form-based code, there is no maximum lot coverage. And
Sure.
so there's nothing, that there's not a limitation that this would be resolving.
okay, so I guess in that case, I would then support like maybe,
Right. Elsewhere in the city that there are maximum lot coverages we
Sure,
should
sure.
take a look at, but the benefit of that would be in the stormwater fee.
got it.
Actually.
I've tried that. I connected all my downspouts to French drains that I dug, and then I went to talk to Professor Di Pietro and said, okay, my roof is now all infiltrated. All the water that comes off my roof is going underground. Don't I get a credit? No.
Well, also residential properties are treated differently, though. They're given a numerical unit. As opposed to an acreage calculation, it's
Well, in our case, it's calculated, the whole development's impervious surface is calculated and
And then the
divided
other-
by the number of
the
units.
other challenge with that is what happens if somebody disconnects that? And that's
I'm disconnected.
no, but then what happens if you undo what you did? Well, I mean, that's just a reality. People
Yeah.
have asked for credits for example, for rain barrels, and then they're like, I don't want to deal with a rain barrel anymore, and then you don't actually have the benefit anymore. But anyway, this is getting.
Anyway,
Yeah. Paul?
So this time I'll be surprised, not shocked. But I am surprised that the developers are finding the administrative approach more difficult than going to the DRB. I mean, that was the whole deal with form-based code was, if you agree with the community that this is what we want, then the benefit to you is, hey, you get a free shot. You don't have to go to the DRB. You can just get an administrative decision. I'm really surprised that has turned out to be a problem, an obstacle. I mean, that is shocking.
I think from what we've heard, there's two major sources of that we're trying to address in this draft. One is that the boxes are very tight in some cases, and so in order to meet the 3 building breaks every 80 feet, plus meet their energy code, plus have the breaks between, let's say, residential units on upper stories makes some logical sense because you can't have a window be halfway through between 2 apartments. They were finding that they were down to the sort of inches in calculation and really struggling to sort of how do we squeeze this last thing in, and that results in a lot of back and forth, which is time and therefore challenge. I think the other one that we're trying to resolve here is when somebody tried to do something creative, it led to some questions of how does the regulation get interpreted. So for example, the 1068 Williston Road, the former Holiday Inn, their roof has this neat pitched angle to it. the form-based code doesn't contemplate what height as a pitched angle roof is, and was that exceeding their maximum height or not exceeding their maximum height? How did it get calculated? Greg Rabideau had some suggestions on how to relieve questions like that in terms of, on the roof, not calculating that space in the same way, so as to relieve the back and forth that would be happening between a designer who has a creative idea and city staff, who then gives a reply, who then brings it over to the developer, and the developer says, that costs too much, but then sends it back to the designer, who sends it back to the city. It's the sort of iterativeness that has, that we got some feedback that we could improve.
Yeah, and there are also about a dozen small changes that our development review staff gave to me that says like, this is something that I've had to interpret. This is how I've interpreted it as a pattern, but it would be great if that language was cleaned up in the actual regulations. So some of that will lead to that being clear from the outset, instead of having to go to our development review staff for clarification or interpretation every time. So we've identified internally, their development review staff identified about a dozen of those small pieces that it's like, well, I've had to interpret this and I've been going with this interpretation, but every time someone has to call me about it. So removing some of those will hopefully cut out a little bit of the second thing that pops up.
So what do you think about the idea of just tossing out form-based code entirely and saying, we tried it for 10 years, it didn't really work for us. Just going back to the regular system.
I think there's the benefit to
We
form-based.
just embodied Paul Engels.
That's an alien.
I can tell you, actually.
I think, because there are very specific goals for the form-based code area and a very specific type of pedestrian-oriented urban landscape that has a residential and commercial intensity of use that supports that kind of pedestrian ecosystem, that the form-based code is really how you get to that. If you go away from the form-based code, I think some of what Paul was mentioning about site-by-site regulation and complexity and having to go to the DRB and having some of these same interpretation questions just in front of a board of people, they don't go away, it just goes to a different place. If we're trying to build out a city center in a certain way, form-based code is really how you draw that, like, here's your blank box, here's the box that you can fit in, do anything you want that fits in that box. And then it eliminates a lot of other things that apply in the rest of the city. So when we have a clear idea that this is supposed to be the most urban part of South Burlington, and that's how we support, vibrancy and community events and a community heart, form-based code is sticking with it and going through the tweaks that we've been working on is sort of the next iteration on how we make that happen.
I mean, that is the original idea of form-based code.
Yep.
They're free, yeah. Any other commissioner questions? Ryan?
Thanks. Yeah, and I would even add to that. I think if I think about the long-term goal, it would be to expand the area of the city that is actually covered by form-based code, and just doing this really slogging work to keep improving it so that it keeps making a better product. But I raised my hand because I wanted to combine what Paul said about creating a 21st century city center and what Donna was bringing up about really the usage of space and stormwater. That I thought that was a really good conversation. And when you look at what we have currently, we have a third of our space is parking lot, and a third of our space is stormwater. And parking lot does really nothing good but store cars. And a water retention pond does not provide good habitat space. It does not provide good park space for people. It ends up being another liminal space. So if 2/3 of our city center is made up of those things, then I would be more interested to look at ways of capping the amount of space from any project that can go into those things, such that the developers have to be more creative about what tools they use, whether it's a green roof, or I think staff would prefer blue roofs because they weigh less and have less maintenance. But some of those options, more underground parking, things of that nature, such that we also get more infill, which benefits agglomeration, but also parking lots and stormwater ponds aren't really paying much in taxes. But if you can have a building there that is nicely built and we don't see so many cars, and the space that we designate as non-building is actually better park space, that is all additive. That really synergizes together. So I know it's only recently the city did away with parking minimums, but I would recommend looking at parking maximums in the form-based code, and possibly looking at something to do with the stormwater pond sizes.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
As a quick comment, I guess just one thing, I guess, just to add to that as well, about parking maxims. I mean, it's like I also occasionally, from a transportation engineer, like think about a decent bit too. I think we do know that Burlington, if I'm remember correctly, has implemented those in some areas. If am I running that correctly?
The parking,
Maximums.
I think that they just got rid of their minimum.
Yeah, they don't have the maximums now?
We
They
have
had-
maximum.
What?
We have parking standards per residential unit, 2 spaces maximum.
Oh, we do? Okay. My apologies. I guess I had not.
So it's not across the board maximum. for
Yeah.
Commercial spaces, and it's another thing, but that's a maximum, the T4 and the T5 for residential.
Oh, cool. Right, okay, and I guess what I had originally, I did one other question on the map, so we're adding a bunch to T4 and T5.
Yep.
Am I understanding, remember that the very light blue area is T4, current T4 boundaries?
Yeah.
So first of all, so T3 is now pretty small, correct?
Yes.
It's a pretty marginal area.
It's
And
really the transition between the form-based code and the surrounding neighborhoods.
yeah, absolutely.
In certain places, it's not everywhere.
I know that I've heard some people on the commission talk about how particularly the area, we're discussing the area north of Williston Road
Mhm.
has a lot of potential for redevelopment. What would be, like, cause my part of my understanding of T4 is that T4 is a bit of a kind of transitional zone in itself, like it's sort of, especially with T5 might, have 10, 12, 14, whatever kind of story maximums. I'm thinking like the area to the north of Williston Road. Would other appeal in the commission, would we consider adding that to T5 as well, or maybe parts of that to T5? It just, I know what people have been talking about, oh, you could really radically change that area at the moment. Putting it in T4 limits the scope of the transformation compared to say T5.
So I think that, so heights can be separated from the transects. So like you could have an overlay that says all of Dorset Street and fronting Williston Road is all 10 stories. If you wanted to, you could say that, even though it crosses the transect boundaries, you could have an overlay. The transects have a lot of other things about frontage requirements and other, so the intention is that the T5 is really the walkable core. And the T4 has slightly relaxed requirements for like the minimum frontage on the street, so that there's a little more room for drive lanes or fronting park space between buildings or spacing between buildings. It's just a little more flexible. You could allow higher buildings north of Williston
Okay.
Road without making it T5.
So we're essentially effectively saying that we want to be concentrating the sort of very dense urban pedestrian stuff along Dorset and Market.
Yep.
Would we consider, maybe this isn't the time for that, but would we consider expanding that along Williston Road? I mean, or is that?
So I think it's a good question. The other component that differentiates today a T4 from a T5 is the T5 requires a first story commercial.
Okay,
And we have a sub recommendation within that, but originally when the form-based code was adopted, the thinking was, given that this part of city center had not been built out, to make sure that as new development takes place, that we're concentrating this new commercial space.
Got it.
In a fairly compact area, so that we're forming a downtown.
I see, okay.
Now that this has been largely, though not entirely, built and hopefully soon to be occupied, we're now thinking to what's the next iteration. So form-based code is always supposed to be sort of growing upwards
Yeah,
and outwards. So we were recommending that, as you think about the stretch from Healthy Living up to the top of Dorset Street, a first story residential use along that area doesn't
Makes sense.
really make sense.
Yeah.
So let's foster that. The sub recommendation within it, which gets to your doorway question from Duncan earlier tonight too, is the original form-based code acknowledging that there wasn't anything that had been built yet here was a lot looser than a lot of form-based codes, in that it said the T5 just had to be non-residential. We're recommending in this, and we're still working out some of the exact language, but that along the specific key corridor, specifically Market Street and maybe also Dorset Street itself, that be refined down to consumer-facing commercial. So really restaurants, retail spaces, that kind of thing. And then allowing the other kinds of commercials to be on the side street. So, you know, this Da Vinci Drive side street, Detilio, sorry. Side street, that could be, say, an office space, but then along the main streets, that the time has come to say, we really need these to be retailers and restaurants, because if everything, you know, with no ill intent to, I don't know, miscellaneous office space, having that be the front of Market Street would be a big disappointment to the community. So that's part of our thinking of expanding it outwards, and then also being clear that the first story, or at least a substantial chunk of that, would be commercial and potentially consumer facing commercial.
But then T5 would be appropriate along Williston Road on the north side.
I mean,
in terms of you, in your.
Commercial on the ground floor. Wouldn't make, you couldn't, residential along there wouldn't.
The only issue is, and this is market based, is you're gonna dilute what we're trying to get on Dorset Street.
What about it?
You're gonna dilute it.
like,
I'm not saying now.
No,
That's next.
future,
Next.
yeah, but right now, I think
Year.
you're spot on with that's the corridor we really
Yeah.
want to
Right.
yeah,
I think
establish
if
as
you make the
our.
area too large, what you wind up is
Is-
not a concentration
Yeah,
of it.
no, I think that's
Initially.
absolutely right. I don't disagree with you, Colin, at some point, but I think right now is not the time. I think that we should concentrate on where they've offered to expand it.
okay, yeah, I mean, I guess my only thought, I see where different comment. My only thought, because is I do definitely see the argument behind really trying to encourage retail in certain areas, but I guess I do want to make sure that I know this sort of also talks a little bit back to our conversation earlier about like multi-use, not multi, mixed development, kind of making sure that we're not making it impossible to offices, because like frankly, people like make sure that we're not being so retail focused that it becomes hard to put an office in all of these spaces. Because I mean, frankly, having people be able to walk to work and get a coffee on their lunch break is a good thing to have, and not have them all be on, like Office Park, out by like, on Logic or something.
Yeah, so that's something that we've talked about, and what I was saying before about the street hierarchies that you've seen a little bit on before is established, saying that the commercial facing a primary street in the T5, which would be basically Dorset and Market in that area, would have to be retail or consumer facing.
On the ground floor.
On the ground floor.
Okay,
It could be office above that, if that was what the market was driving.
okay,
It could, and there's intended in the street hierarchy map that is still being worked on, that there's cross streets, whereas like we're saying here, Detilio Drive, access road to the pool. On Market Street is where you have, your deli or whatever. Immediately around the corner, or,
Got
one
it.
unit depth
Yeah.
back can be offices. It's not saying everything on the ground floor in the T5 has to be.
okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Do you guys feel that you've gotten what you need from us
Yes.
on this? Yeah,
Oh, just very quickly, if you look through the motivation table, is there anything in the columns of motivations that you're like, you know what, this memo and these what you've outlined as drafts really misses the boat on one of those 5 things? Or is they feel adequately addressed?
Yep.
At least as you can say now, with it being sort of at a topic level.
I would say so. Yes.
Okay, that was just my last question.
Okay.
Sorry, too slow.
Okay, all right, so if we're done with number 5, we can move on to number 6, LDR heights regulation, project charge review and discussion. And just FYI, and I was confused when I talked to you, and I'm glad I talked to you. This has to do with the whole city,
Yes.
not with form-based code.
Correct. So
Yeah.
this
So
is
we're-
a
we're-
separate project.
Yes,
for Form-based code. There
Yeah.
may be some touch points.
Yeah.
This
Um,
is the donut, not the hole.
Sure.
That's what it means.
So,
Donut.
over the last few years, there's been some things that have been identified by yourselves, by city council, by DRB, by staff about how we calculate, this is fairly technical, how we calculate height. So there was a extended back and forth at the courts, question of an accessory dwelling unit in the Chamberlain neighborhood where the building was too tall, and one of their proposals was to basically extend the roof to make it seem like an A-frame all the way down to the ground, which technically under the regulations would have made it shorter, even though it actually made it not any shorter and frankly uglier. And that was ultimately not settled on, but it was like, but council's feedback from that was, we gotta look at this and make sure that we're being thoughtful about it. From the DRB end, there are, it's a little bit tricky to calculate how a neighborhood a new neighborhood is supposed to be laid out. You calculate heights from pre-construction grade, which has some, logic to it on a site-by-site basis, but when you're developing a neighborhood, you've got roads that you're doing and you're wanting to have, the correct flow of water, and you wind up with this sort of situation where a lot of applicants are asking for essentially a waiver from the DRB to then be able to put a half basement in, and it's just unnecessarily complex is basically the question in there. In the city center form-based code area along Market Street, we, instead of doing a pre-construction grade, the building height is calculated from the height of the adjacent street.
From where?
The height of the adjacent street. So Market Street
Yep.
itself sort of goes up and down in order to have flow to it. So buildings are calculated relative to the street as opposed to relative to whatever might have been there before. So the project charge here, we're not looking for the answers. The project charge is to look at all of those things, just as we did the project charge a couple months ago for the uses and the east end of, east end of the city. Is this what to look into? So we're seeking your approval on.
Yeah, so this
the
is, as
project
you saw
charge.
before in the fall, this is our third iteration of this is the boundaries of the project and what is being discussed in this, just so that everybody knows at the outset and the public can know from the outset what is being discussed and what are the contours of the project.
No pun.
Yeah,
Well,
well,
maybe-
The
Contours.
example that Paul gave, that was the first house that was built in, at Spear Meadows. Because they also
Oh, yeah.
had to build it up, and you couldn't use the pre-construction grade,
Right.
or you could, but then he was too high.
And then further using that one also as an example, our regulations don't necessarily have the same clarity that some of the building code standards have as to how you measure height. So when you have multiple pitches on a height on a roof, our regulations just assume a very simple
Straight line,
building
yeah.
that has one roof line on it. Building codes often define, and I'm sure Donna could speak to this, how you determine often from the highest pitch.
Yep.
But even then, sometimes you have a short side and a long side in a salt box type house. We don't have any clarification for that, so that leaves, up to staff and the DRB to make calls, which is not ideal.
So,
Well, and I don't know if this is also part of the charging here, because we're also allowing a lot more square footage to be built on sites. And, it seems like this would be a good time to really look at just increasing the allowed height. Like another story in some of the districts.
So there is a bullet point recommended maximum heights. So that is part of.
Right, although
But we're not talking about stories here, we're talking about heights, and so, you know, specifically include the idea that we are allowing higher densities in some areas, and to get that density, you have to go a story higher, potentially, on a smaller site. And where can you do this and where can't you do this?
So I think that is a great question for you all. To that specific point, Donna, we had a conversation at the staff level. We didn't put it in here in the draft, but we were hoping that somebody would ask the question. Because this is largely technical when we talk about recommended maximum heights, it's really about calculations,
Between
not about
choice.
policy choice. If the commission would like us to also be coming back with some recommendations around whether an additional story is appropriate in certain areas, then that can certainly be added to the charge, but we didn't want to assume that from the technical nature of it. So I guess that's your discussion to have. And this is exactly the right time to have that
Right.
conversation.
Well, that's what I was hoping. I mean, because, you know, it kept coming up last year, when we were talking about, adding more residential, units. And especially on some of the smaller sites. So I would recommend that we do consider, at least at the moderate, moderate density. No, we don't say moderate
Medium.
scale.
Medium
scale.
Medium
That's
scale,
right.
right?
The medium scale. Even some of the larger homes, I mean, I think they're starting to get pretty big. And, I'm just not sure how some of those houses that you see from Spear Street ever got to be the size that they are.
Some of them predate the current regulations. So we had higher and then they got lower. So. Yeah. So I think that's your discussion to have.
So. But my feeling is it should be as simple as possible. I mean, we originally started from the bottom up, which was pre-construction grade. Maybe we should also start from the top down, which takes the peak as the top of the measurement under all circumstances. Flat roof, I don't know. It's simple.
Yeah, because I could see that when we were talking about certain developers would come in, they only talk about doing flat roof buildings because they're trying to build to the maximum. And I'm like, well, you don't really want a flat roof building there, do you? You know, it's just like, let's just increase the amount.
So I'm hearing
Increase the
from
height that
Donna
lets them put a
wanting
slope.
to discuss
a
discuss
slope
in a future discussion what the appropriate heights are in different areas. And from Michael, the discussion of how is height measured is appropriately within this scope.
Yeah.
And whether that's
obviously they're
peak,
gonna
and whether that's mid, and whether that's flat, like that's all.
That's essentially what the
part-
project is to give
Yep.
some sort of,
Right, so I'm hearing
Yeah.
simplicity from Michael.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gonna be different in a viewscape than it is somewhere else.
no, but is that not the scope to really
Yeah.
determine some finite way that it's
Right, well, I
across
think
the board?
Michael's recommendation is in the scope.
Yeah.
Good feedback to hear that simplicity is a goal,
Mhm.
absolutely. Donna's question about should we be considering
And that's,
more height is not in this, so if you want that, which we're perfectly fine doing it or not doing it, you all should give us direction on that.
okay, Colin, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is something I kind of agree with both of you. Yeah, I think this seems like a good, I like the idea of rolling what should the maximum height be, but I agree with you that having a fairly simple, straightforward calculation of what the max height is good, but maybe we want to also, but then is that right max height the right number? I guess one thing, I don't want this to overcomplicate things, but are we, my understanding is like whether we're trying to limit stuff by height or by stories are kind of two different ways of doing it.
And it currently regulates by both.
Yeah,
And different stories when you're facing different directions, and that's all part of the scope to iron out which is better and which.
yeah, I like
Doesn't
it.
have both anymore.
I like the idea of having one or the other. I also, maybe this is kind of getting too into the weeds. I guess I'm also curious how this sort of plays into issues where you like buildings where you have like livable area within the roof. You know what I mean? Like essentially, and I'm sorry, I butchered the term on this, but I'm putting up this like when the roof is part of the livable structure. What?
Dormers.
Yeah, we're saying that dormers will exist now. Or even didn't have dormers, have the
And real ones even.
Yeah.
Plastered
Yeah,
on
I guess
a
yeah.
roof building, which
But
is
we're
like,
not talking
whoa.
about maximum, we're just talking about how to measure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
But that's
Adding the question of appropriate maximum height.
Right.
i.e., should we consider more height?
Yeah.
Not an answer on it, but should that be
Should that be
part of the
part of-
scope?
Yes.
I like that.
Yeah. Paul, go ahead.
We should remember the guy who built his house in front of Overlook Park. You know, that was a disaster. You know, that.
I didn't hear that.
The guy
Remember
who built
what-
his house in front of Overlook Park.
But that was a view corridor issue. That wasn't just a building height issue. It was a view corridor issue.
Well, it was a building height issue, that he was able to build a 3-story house.
Oh, no, it was like, it was specifically the place where he put the house. was
Right,
In a view
right.
corridor that was designated, right?
Right.
It
Maybe
was
it wasn't
immediately
back then.
before we had view.
Yeah.
Ah.
The view corridor did not exist when that house was built.
Subsequently, they complained about trees.
Yeah.
So I saw some head nodding. I think what
Yeah.
we'd like to see in this charge is, first of all, a motion to approve the charge. And
Okay.
if you would like to have, as part of the assessment, exploring additional height, then that should be added to the.
To the
motion.
motion.
So
Okay,
moved.
right, well, we need the motion.
Motion to approve the project charge, which is titled Built Heights Calculations and Standards.
well, Hank, should we be amending it if we're
And amending it.
and amending? Okay.
And amending it to include
And amending, and suggested amendments.
maximum building height.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Hi.
Yep, Jessica was
Did
with
we
us,
have-
all right?
Maximum.
Yep,
in the-
yes,
in the-
yes, she did your work for you.
Thank you.
All right. Sorry, let me go back to the,
Is municipal planning?
yep, number 7, sorry, number 7, municipal planning grant.
All right, so it's the annual time of the year where we can possibly, where we can apply for municipal planning grants from the state. Staff went through a bunch of options as to what would be both a project that is right on your horizon, that's identified by yourselves and by council, and that might be a really good fit for the grant. And so we would seek your endorsement to go to council for a grant for
Fayette Drive and
right, a center in that area.
the node.
I have one typo at the bottom,
Oh,
the second
no,
part.
nuts.
Southwest,
Right.
the last line.
I know, that confused me to no end. I'm trying to think southeast.
First,
Southeast. The
Oh,
second
so it's supposed to be
paragraph.
southway, yeah,
Last line in the second
yeah, so
paragraph.
southwest.
Oh,
And
just above project proposal.
We're gonna put a note in the SEQ? Great.
it's rocket.
Okay. That's gonna take a motion.
Go to the comment, I'll make the motion.
Southwest, okay, all right,
No, I
Michael,
like it.
yeah, I think it's a great, everyone agree? That's
That's a good.
yeah.
Good place.
Yeah.
Recommended action.
Michael, you wanna make the motion?
I move to recommend that the city council approve the application for a municipal planning grant to fund a process that will establish a vision for a new center of strategic growth located in the city's southwest area.
Do I have a second? All right, Donna seconded. All in favor?
All right,
Aye.
Hi.
All right, Jessica's with us. That was unanimous.
All right.
You may proceed.
Street name.
Street name.
We have a proposed street name. So, this is a property on the east side of Heinsberg Road at 860. It's the Wright property, Wright Farm. Just south of DR Trimmer, north of Meadowland. There's currently a silo with a cell tower on it and 3 homes. They're proposed and they're in front of the DRB to subdivide, effectively to provide housing lots for their children and family members. So they have proposed Maxine Way as the name of the street coming off of Heinsberg Road and serving those homes. We've examined this against E911. We don't see any conflict. There's a typo in here because they did originally propose Maxine's with an S. We recommended that it just be Maxine because Maxine's was a little confusing because you can't have an apostrophe in a street name. And then Maxine's plural sounded a little off.
Must be somebody who's important to them.
Yes, so
So
the assumption is a family member or,
Mhm.
or other, personal
They
history.
were here, they were.
Yes.
Yeah, they
with us a
came
couple
from
of
us.
times.
Yes.
Is this a private drive or a public road or?
It is, as approved by the DRB, it is private for now. It may long-term be further extended up to down to Meadowlands, at which time it could be eligible to be public.
Okay,
But for the foreseeable future, it will be private. So Maxine Way is their top choice.
That would be their top choice.
Yes.
That was my question. What was their?
Yep.
Their top choice is
Okay.
Maxine Way.
Whoop, Jessica, I'm sorry.
Could you show on the map where it is?
Yeah.
Because I was looking and it was just hard to tell with the other property in between.
Paul is sharing the screen as we speak.
Okay. Moment.
Yeah, so you see that sort of
It's
parking
about
lot with
this.
some trucking.
It's about just to
yeah.
orient people a little bit. I-89,
Yeah.
Heinsberg Road here. Butler Farms is just appearing on your bottom left here.
In a different aerial photograph.
It's up at the top.
So it's right
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So they're sort of cleaning all of this up and building a roadway that will go to about here. And then swing, ultimately in a future version of it, swing south towards,
Is that Meadowland?
Meadowland.
Yeah.
and then they'll have a park space back in this corner of it over here.
They're required to build it to their property line or no?
They're required to leave the space.
Right, so they did a master plan, so in their master plan, phase 1 and phase 2 involve just building the east-west leg and laying out the right-of-way for the future. Phase 3 would have them build it to their property line.
Okay.
But that's the usefulness of the master plan to them, is to lay out infrastructure in thoughtful, logical ways.
Is that one of the cases where it's reserved for future use?
No,
The east part,
they just did it within their master plan.
Okay.
They laid it out, yeah.
Jessica, did you have another question?
No, that was it. This was helpful.
Okay.
I liked the name.
Maxine.
Maxine Way, yeah. Yeah, Colin, go ahead.
yeah, I like the name. I guess just very briefly, I'm curious. So if there's no E911 like conflicts or anything, like why would we not approve this? Like what is sort of the rationale for this general context? Yeah, I have no objections
So
personally.
we have some sort of semi-official guidelines. Where we generally don't want a street to be named after a business located on that street. For example, we have an IDX Drive that no longer has an IDX on it.
Well, Hanford drives the way, isn't it too?
Yes.
It has the Lowe's on it, yeah.
Yes.
And a Tesla.
And a Tesla, yeah. So not doing that anymore. Generally no punctuation, or
Okay.
that's just a state requirement. And we are pushing very hard to not name streets after dead white guys.
Okay.
Like Jefferson.
No, but also Kelsey, beyond that,
Yeah.
I think you're checking like surrounding towns,
Yes.
like making sure there's not a lane in
another.
one spot, a road in another spot. Like,
Yeah, so that's the E911 cross-checking, is we're making sure that if someone's being dispatched, an ambulance is being dispatched, they don't end up in Williston on a very similar sounding street by accident.
Or just somewhere else in South
Or
Burlington.
somewhere else. South
And it's not just the name, it's the sound of the name. So we
Mhm.
checked with the fire department on most of these. Then the reason that you get a couple of options is frankly, just for expediency of process, we don't make them come to the meeting. So if staff missed something and for some reason you said, oh, yeah, there actually is a Maxine Way that you missed, that they've got their second option right there ready for you to go. That's the
Gotcha.
reason that they give you extras.
But they said Maxine and Wade and Maxine.
Right, so they were,
Just option.
right.
Yeah.
They don't really mind. The reason that you have that specifically is one of the ones that they had proposed was Mason, something Boulevard.
Means
And we said Boulevard is too big of a street name
for a
for a
little.
little street.
Gotcha.
And then the last unofficial rule that staff gives them as
Oh.
guidance is no fake history.
This
So-
couldn't say
Old Creamery Road.
Green Pond Road, when there was never a pond on it. Old Creamery.
Is that day at Grandview Drive?
We're looking forward.
Yeah. All right, so what do we need? A motion to approve Maxine Way?
Maxine Way.
So moved.
We missed the motion. So Colin, you want to make a motion?
Sure, yeah, motion to name this street Maxine Way. Is that correct?
I think Mike made the motion.
Oh, did me? Oh,
Oh, Mike-
he just said so moved. All right, well, that's fine. All right,
Okay.
either way. We did second?
Colin, second.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
All right, Maxine Way it is.
Quick question, did they design a hammerhead where it would approach the end of the property? In the best when we did, okay.
All right,
Minutes.
number 9, upcoming topics.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just to make sure that you're still aware of things that are in the works, the uses consolidation and supporting uses in commercial areas discussion is still on the table. It's still moving forward. The form-based code took precedence over some other things. As noted in announcements, the city council has given some direction on removal of ledge and nuisance ordinance, and so that will be coming to the planning commission for your role in that new regulation. We're also planning to have a city plan 2024 year 1 check-in. So checking in with the planning commission, but also with other committees and departments about how things are going towards the goals that are in the plan that was approved 13 months ago, just about. Act 181 and Act 250 tiers, that's further opportunity and compliance with state statute that will be coming in through the spring and summer. So just being aware that that is coming.
Right, and
Right.
specifically to that one, coming up this summer, the council will be asked whether, by the Regional Planning Commission, whether the city is going to move forward with seeking some Act 250 exemptions, which are, must be requested by the municipality through the Regional Planning Commission. And as briefly mentioned to you at a recent meeting, we're preparing some homework in the background, and we thought that it would be useful for the council for you to have spent some time on the subject to give them some recommendations. Very expertise, so.
Do we know when we're gonna get the housing targets from the CCRPC? For us, not for the.
For us, I believe that their schedule is early summer to be doing that. Yeah.
Okay. All right, we have 2 sets of minutes to approve, the January 14th and January 28th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes, or are there any issues with the minutes?
I read them through there, and I didn't see anything that stuck out. So I'd move to approve the minutes of January the 14th, 2025, and January the 28th, 2025.
Second,
I second.
all right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, I think we are adjourned.
I assume you're in favor, Jessica?
I'm sorry, Jesse. She may,
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
sorry, Jess.
No problem.
The reason I had to ask the question is under the new open meeting law, if there's anybody remote,
They have to.
it has to be unanimous. If it's not unanimous, it has to be roll call. So just following
All
our.
right,
Yeah.
Yes, I approve.
okay. Now we are adjourned. Be well, Jessica.
See you. Thank you.
Early.
Yeah.
Okay.
Paul, when's our next meeting?
I'm not.